Breaking news. The world woke up to a shocking reality. For the first time in modern history, the United States no longer looks like the unrivaled superpower. That title now belongs to China. And who is to blame? Many are pointing straight at President Donald Trump. On September 3rd, Beijing staged the largest military parade in its history, a spectacle designed not just to celebrate, but to send a message. Hypersonic missiles rolled past crowds in perfect formation, naval drones and stealth bombers thundered overhead, and for the first time ever, China unveiled its complete nuclear triad to the world. It was a declaration of dominance, as Xi Jinping stood at the podium flanked by Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un. The image was impossible to ignore. An authoritarian alliance presenting itself as the future of global leadership. International broadcasters compared it to a coronation. The New World Order has arrived, declared one European outlet, while commentators across Asia described it as the end of American hegemony. Even in Washington, stunned officials admitted privately that the balance of power had shifted. And what was America's answer? Silence. President Trump, who built his brand on promises of strength, offered little more than bluster. His administration had spent years picking fights with allies, retreating from international commitments, and relying on tariffs and sound bites instead of strategy. The result, when the world looked to the United States for leadership, there was nothing but empty slogans. The optics of Beijing's parade told the story better than any words. China, once dismissed as a challenger, had arrived on the world stage as the commander of a new global order. And for millions watching, one question rang louder than the roar of the fighter jets. How did America lose its place at the top? The uncomfortable answer, whispered in Washington corridors and shouted on foreign broadcasts, was the same. Donald Trump's leadership had paved the way. What unfolded in Beijing was more than a parade. It was the unveiling of a new world map. Analysts call it CRINK, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Once treated as outliers or regional threats, these nations now stand together as a bloc, united by shared defiance of the West and fueled by America's shrinking influence. And the world is watching. Xi Jinping stood shoulder to shoulder with Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un, the optics alone a nightmare for U.S. strategists. Iran sent high-level envoys, signaling its readiness to cement the alliance. European newspapers called it the axis of the new century. African leaders applauded Beijing's investments, while South American governments quietly lined up behind China's trade offers. The message was unmistakable. Global power is tilting eastward. For decades, America's dominance relied not only on its military might, but on its alliances. NATO, the G7 Pacific partnerships. These were the pillars that kept Washington's influence unshakable. But under Trump, those alliances fractured. He quarreled with European leaders, mocked NATO commitments, and imposed tariffs on allies while praising autocrats. When the moment came for the West to stand united, America stood alone. The consequences were immediate. While the U.S. withdrew from trade pacts and climate accords, China stepped in, offering infrastructure, energy, and weapons. While Trump attacked multilateral institutions, Beijing built them. The result, CRINK now presents itself as the alternative, a bloc of authoritarian powers promising stability to a world weary of American drama. Social media across Asia buzzed with patriotic pride as images of the parade spread, while in Washington, hashtags like #AmericaNotFirst and #TrumpFailed began trending. Commentators didn't mince words. Trump had campaigned on America first. But his presidency had delivered the opposite. By alienating allies and empowering rivals, he had opened the door for China to crown itself as the leader of a new global order. And as Xi, Putin, and Kim smiled for the cameras, the world saw something that once seemed unthinkable, an axis of power, confident and united, standing where America used to. As the images of Beijing's military might circled the globe, attention turned back to Washington and the failures of Donald Trump's leadership. For years, he had promised to make America great again, yet under his watch, the country found itself weakened, isolated, and overtaken. Critics say it wasn't bad luck. It was the inevitable result of his choices. Economically, Trump leaned on tariffs as his primary weapon against China. He slapped taxes on steel, technology, and electronics, boasting that it would cripple Beijing's economy. Instead, China retaliated, deepened its self-sufficiency, and accelerated its Made in China 2025 program. By 2025, the results were undeniable. China dominated solar energy, electric vehicles, and semiconductor manufacturing, industries that were supposed to be America's future. The U.S. had not slowed China's rise, it had fueled it. On the diplomatic front, Trump's record was equally disastrous. He alienated NATO allies, mocked the European Union, and insulted leaders who had stood shoulder to shoulder with America for decades. Meanwhile, he praised strongmen like Putin and Kim Jong Un, giving legitimacy to the very figures now parading in Beijing. America's alliances, once the cornerstone of its power, cracked under the strain of his insults and neglect. Even his domestic gestures revealed more style than substance. In a widely ridiculed move, Trump announced the rebranding of the Pentagon back to the Department of War, a symbolic nod to toughness, but one that did nothing to strengthen America's global position. While he celebrated renaming ceremonies, Beijing unveiled fleets of hypersonic missiles. It was the perfect metaphor: rhetoric versus reality. At home, his obsession with loyalty tests and personal vendettas left institutions hollowed out. Experienced diplomats resigned in droves, military leaders clashed with his erratic orders, and Congress was consumed by partisan battles stoked by his tweets. The result was paralysis at the very moment the world demanded strategy. By the time China staged its parade, America was no longer seen as the anchor of the free world. It was seen as a nation adrift, with a president more concerned about headlines and grudges than about safeguarding the global order. And, as critics pointed out, Trump hadn't just failed to stop America's decline, he had accelerated it. The Beijing parade was more than a show of strength. It was a turning point. For the first time since World War II, the world is openly questioning whether the United States is still the leader of the free world. The uncomfortable answer: it may not be. And under Donald Trump, that decline has only accelerated. Allies who once looked to Washington for guidance are hedging their bets. Europe debates its own defense strategies independent of NATO. African and South American nations sign trade pacts with Beijing. The Middle East increasingly looks eastward for military technology and infrastructure projects. America, once the gravitational center of global politics, feels less like a sun and more like a fading star. Inside the U.S., the consequences are just as stark. Economists warn that American industries are falling behind in key sectors, from clean energy to microchips. Military experts admit privately that China's advancements in hypersonics and naval drones represent a serious challenge to U.S. deterrence. And on the streets, ordinary citizens are left wondering how America first turned into America alone. For Trump, The political fallout is devastating. His base may cheer his fiery speeches and symbolic gestures, but international leaders see them for what they are: distractions from a shrinking superpower. The rebranded Department of War may win applause at rallies, but it does nothing to counter China's expanding influence. Each day, the contrast grows sharper. A China projecting power with precision and an America drowning in division and rhetoric. What comes next is uncertain, but the trajectory is clear. The multipolar world is no longer a theory, it is reality. The Krink bloc, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, presents itself as a united front. Democracies scramble to adapt. The risk of new conflicts, economic or military, looms larger with each passing day. Historians may look back at this moment and ask, when did America lose its place at the top? The answer will point not to a single parade in Beijing, but to years of missteps and arrogance in Washington, culminating in the Trump presidency. And as the world shifts toward a new order, America is left with a sobering truth. It wasn't defeated by China alone. It was undone by its own leader.